Telling you,
Go ahead, take it down, bitch. See what's behind that Bernie Sanders poster. Oh, yeah, it's a head-sized fucking hole in the drywall. I guess that's for my ex-girlfriend.
Oh, I
yeah, you didn't know that.
Bit.
Yeah. You didn't know about that, did you?
Klobuchar's head through.
Yeah.
A direct threat on the life of Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, maybe you should put that Bernie Sanders poster back up.
Mm-hmm.
Or we'll have another use for that hole.
Mm-hmm.
Is storing my collection of European chocolates.
When you leave me.
When you leave
and I get fat as shit from eating European chocolates.
My expensive European chocolates. Do you get fatter after breakups? I can't remember when you were.
Oh, big time. That's I can't. When I'm sad, I just retreat and I get fat as shit.
Oh, when I'm sad, I can't.
Were you getting fatter when we first met?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in a feeding zone.
A feeder relationship?
No.
I remember. It was so funny. I remember hanging out with you. I'm like, damn, it's like, I don't think that guy could get any fatter.
Oh, brother, were you wrong?
Yeah, you were pumped up.
I don't understand, like,
where, pumped up.
like, how much fatter he, because you were probably 100 pounds bigger than you are now, right?
Close, yeah.
Damn.
Well, not maybe 70.
Not 100. Yeah.
70, though.
That's a lot, dude.
Legitimately. And I'm fat now. Like, imagine 70 more of it, like, on this damn frame.
But that was after a breakup.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was after my college girlfriend. And
Are you ready to rock?
I lose weight.
I wish,
too.
dude. A lot of my friends are like,
but I think it's because like I like lift weights and work out while I'm in a relationship and in a relationship.
you get weak.
No, I just stop going to the gym.
Yeah.
And then if I stop going to the gym, I lose weight.
Right. No, I get fat as fuck. The second I get sad,
Yeah.
I'm hitting Popeyes.
Yeah.
I'm saying, what's up, boys?
Pop guys.
Yep. And I have sex with everyone in there.
Hi, team.
Everything all right?
Yeah, the headphone wire just.
Yeah, dude, I was getting fat as fuck. Just taut as hell.
Yeah.
Dude, Popeyes is on fucking Uber Eats.
I know. Popeyes is on Seamless now.
Can we teleport to the point? We have 3 healers if you play healer, though.
Oh, I'll switch. My bad.
Hello, Serious Survivor here.
Alzar.
Nuclear war could easily be one of the most devastating scenarios mankind could ever face. We have over 15,000
I'm sorry.
weapons in the world, with over half of those pointing directly. Say we're
Log off.
more than ever before.
That's so funny.
It is, isn't it? But it's also true, and I'm very serious.
What if I identify as a woman? Chunk one. Nice.
Although it's not 100% for this scenario, we can prepare and ultimately give ourselves a better chance of survival.
Fight point.
You have a tour up front.
Doom in.
Here we'll discuss several things we can do to prepare. These steps will give us the greatest chance for survival and the best
Doom 1.
ability for a long term.
It's okay, I'll get him for you.
Number 1.
Thanks,
Learn
I'm a
the
tank.
areas near you that will be
Could you done it before I died?
nuclear power plants, fuel storage depots, gas refineries, chemical plants,
Junk 1.
weapons, ammo plants, population
Left side.
centers, urban, large
Nice.
cities,
Good job.
military
Thanks, Captain.
installations, airfields, bases, and similar. Not all of these.
Yeah, we're
Sorry,
solo
overextended.
rocking Lucio heals,
But
so
once
I'm
the
not
grid
trying
is
to.
down, then these facilities will ultimately
Yeah,
fail,
get
which
that-
means
get
the
that ass.
possibility of large
Let's just go
Let's
main.
go, let's go.
chemical
Yeah.
leaks producing acid clouds and
Junk
rains,
high right.
contaminants,
Junk
all
bottom.
pouring into the water sources and food stocks. So knowing where these facilities are in relation to you can be an influential factor in the fight for survival. A good method for doing this is to use a map of your location.
Yeah, they have a
and the
turret
surrounding
top
area.
back.
On the map, mark all of the structures or facilities that would be primary or secondary targets. I use red to mark the primary targets and blue to mark the secondary or tertiary targets. By doing this, I can easily
Rip.
see which areas would be areas that navigating through would be dangerous, if not deadly. Having
Don't
a
know
graphic
why,
aid such as this helps me to remember and visualize the entire situation. This at least gives us the general idea of what parts of our localized
Doom hanging
region
around
we should
somewhere.
plan our routes to avoid and what parts may be safer to travel or even hold up in.
Alright, top
From
right,
my
top right.
location map, we can see that the majority of the major targets are to the north, the
Doom's
east, and the
behind
south,
us.
which
Man,
does
need
allow
some
this
help.
area towards the west here to make for a good evacuation
still-
route or
still
bug
back
out
there?
location.
Yeah,
There are
we need
things
more
that have
heals
to be
than
factored
solo
in.
Lucio.
I can switch to heals
Weather
if you're
and wind
comfortable with solo
patterns.
tanking.
Determine using normal
we can
weather
try.
patterns what areas are most likely
I want
to
to combo
be
with these are.
contaminated with radioactive fallout. Determining weather patterns can be as easy as a Google search. Understanding the average weather patterns in our general vicinity can help us accurately predict in which direction the
Yeah, let's
fallout
just
will most likely
push,
precipitate
yeah.
towards. Although these patterns can
Let's push
change
grab
with time
something.
and could be disrupted during and because of a
Grab
nuclear
higher and
attack,
then we go.
at least having a strong
Come a little late.
baseline will enable us to plan ahead and formulate multiple escape routes to
go
evacuate
in
the
now?
area when needed. In which
On the top?
directions and what areas
Anytime you raise are.
Alright, turret's bottom.
fallout. For example, looking at my area, know the average weather patterns
Doom's
and
down,
what normally
but
to
so is
expect.
our Merc.
These winds come from the southwest to the western side of my location. It generally
Oh,
crosses
the
my
fucking wire
location
gun.
with winds heading east to northeast, as we can see here. With these types of wind patterns, the largest danger from fallout I would face would originate from Atlanta.
Zari's still ready to,
It crosses
Yeah,
directly
we can do
over my area under normal
Tara.
conditions. But we do see that the other primary
I see ya.
targets and the secondary ones are
There's
to
a
the north
Doomfist
and
mid.
northeast of me. This would result in fallout from these facilities moving further eastward or maybe even northeast, which in turn would not impact me in my
Ready?
location. The best evacuation route for me would be in this
Ooh.
direction, directly west,
Oh, we don't have mercy
placing
yet.
me in the mountain range on the west side of my county. Now, this gives me the ability of being
Torb's
able to
spamming
at
from
least a
left,
generalized
doom inting.
area that I need to reach to find safety and shelter, because knowing this gives me
Nice
a
pick.
pretty good idea of which way the fallout will predominantly precipitate in.
it's
Be aware that
4v6,
areas with a lot of
5.
rain, or if rain is currently occurring, then this will shorten the distance in which the short-term fallout may spread and will increase its effect on those areas. Number 3, bug in or bug out. Decide if bugging in or
They're all
bugging
grabbed
out
up
is
top.
necessary. So based on the data from the map and the research of a particular area,
Doom's
we can
down
determine
bottom.
if bugging
Watch
out
yourself,
is an
Merc.
absolute or if
know if
bunkering
I will.
in is a
It's down,
possibility.
turret's
If you're
down.
within the suspected fallout zones or near to where you predict there will be targets, then bug out may be the best option. But if you live far enough away from these areas
Whoops.
and fallout
Forgot there's no
patterns
walls
and
to
normal
pin
wind
to.
conditions would not precipitate in your location from the map that we made earlier, then bugging in may be a valid
Ew.
option. Number 4,
It's okay, we got a
bunkering
tick.
your home
I come
or
up
your
mid with
bugging
shatter.
location, or both. If bunkering
Just live,
down
buddy.
or bugging in, go ahead and gather the supplies to secure
Lucy, let's go
the
speed.
home by sealing
Speed, speed,
inlets
speed,
and
speed.
chimneys,
Oh.
windows,
I'd switch
etc.
Ana now.
And the same
It's too late
goes
now.
for
Stay on,
bug-out
stay on.
locations. Plastic with strong tape on the
Ana
exterior
speed.
and interior of all inlets, windows, and doors.
Hit me with that
Plastic, but
speed dirt.
preferably solid material to form
Give
an
me that
airtight seal around
needle.
any other openings such as chimneys, chutes, cellar doors. If the home
Sorry,
is
no
not
personal?
extremely close to the hypocenter, then for many people it's just the fallout
Doom
they
doing?
worry about. And fallout particles
He's
can
behind,
be
he picked our
blocked from
Merc.
entering by making the structure
Yeah.
as airtight as possible. There's much more to securing our location than just these few things, and we're going to get
Flood
in
if you
depth in
can,
that on another video soon.
She's
Number
about to get
5,
doomed.
formulate a plan for bugging out.
He's focused on me.
Whether we may feel it's safe to bunker down or bug in, there's still the need to have a bug out contingency plan ready. Take the information we have already gathered and determine the best route
Nice.
for evacuating the area. The requirements for this are the route must be accessible
Zara on
to
a
all in
low.
the group. They should also
Zara,
be
no
the roads
personal?
less traveled.
No
Remember, when
friendly?
determining this route, it must be within reason. Attempting to reach a location further than 50 to 100 miles away, this isn't a bug-out route anymore. It's a long journey at this point, and this will
Nice
be
res.
harder for most people. Other people will be bugging out too, and unless we take a route that is completely secluded, then most likely we will run across others. This can often lead to situations that require the use of self-defense or stealth tactics. Always have more than one route planned. Use
This
the map
Doom is a
marked
super
earlier
huge
with the nuclear
problem.
targets, wind patterns,
Right.
and fallout expectations. Using this,
Tried
plan
pinning him,
multiple
but
escape routes
missed.
with multiple branches. Mark them on your map, and also mark rally points or meeting locations the members should meet if anyone becomes separated. This may sound complicated having a lot of routes to remember, but once
They don't
again,
get the
that
first point
demonstrates the
and we win.
importance of using gear such as a good compass and map marked with the things we have discussed. Number 6. A radiation detecting device will measure the amount of radiation that one is
Who has
exposed to
my
at that
gold
current
lens?
moment in time. This is a reading of the amount in real time or sometimes a matter of minutes depending on the device. A typical
You
Geiger
got it?
counter consists of a Geiger-Muller tube. It's a type of ionization chamber
You
that
got the
counts particles of
gold.
radiation. Most Geiger counters also have an audio that sounds like one click for each particle count, and a large number of particles produced in a short span of time sound almost like static from a radio. Geiger counters that have meter readouts in CPM, that means counts or clicks per minute. CPM is the unit normally used to measure alpha and beta radiation. There are 4
Ready
but
for TP.
different interrelated units for
True.
measuring radioactivity,
I freeze 'em,
exposure,
you shoot 'em.
absorbed dose, and dose equivalent. These can be remembered easily by the acronym READ, R-E-A-D. R, radioactivity, refers to the amount of ionizing radiation released by a material.
Oh,
The
the
quantity of
medieval
radioactive
one.
material is expressed in terms of its radioactivity, or basically its activity. This represents how many atoms in the material decay in a given time period. The units of measure for
But be
radioactivity
careful
are
back
the
there.
Curie
Hook.
and the
They have a,
factor E, exposure.
Sombra.
Exposure describes the amount of radiation traveling through the air. Many radiation monitors measure exposure. The units for exposure are the Rontgen and the Coulomb.
Turret main.
Getting the turret.
A, absorbed
Turret
dose.
down.
Describes the amount of
Here, let shield
radiation absorbed
recharge.
by an object or a person. That is the amount of energy that radioactive
Sloppy
sources
positioning.
deposit in materials through
I'm
which they
hacked.
pass.
Shield broke.
Units for absorbed dose are the radiation absorbed dose, RAD, and the gray, D, dose equivalent, or effective
We lost it. Fall back to
dose.
second
This
point.
combines the amount of radiation absorbed and the medical effects of that type of radiation. For beta and gamma radiation, the dose equivalent is the same as the absorbed dose, and this is also known as the Q
I
factor.
lost it.
The dose equivalent is larger than the absorbed dose for
can't
alpha
get
and
back.
neutron radiation because these types of
Well, I
radiation
didn't
are
even
more
like that
damaging to
point
human
anyways.
tissue.
This
Units for
place is
dose
much
equivalent
better.
are the Rontgen equivalent man, REM, and the sievert. Biological dose equivalents are commonly measured in 1/1000th of a rem, known as the millirem.
I got Zarya coming in, man. They're creeping up the main.
Left, 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 left.
Point,
Upstairs.
speed point.
I'm hacked as
Oh,
well.
yeah. I die here. Hog one.
Oh, hog one.
Fallout.
Yeah.
1 hour
just
after
lost
surface
it.
burst, the radiation from
Yeah.
fallout.
I say we get, like,
region is
I don't
30
know,
grays per
hit scan
hour.
or something
That
to melt
would be
hog,
the
like
full
3.
body equivalent.
The game's over.
Numbers
That would have
we
been
mentioned
the
here
fucking
are
play
entire
instead of
body
me.
exposures.
Nice try, guys.
Initial fallout radiation decays relatively quickly with time. Most areas become fairly safe for travel and decontamination after 2 to 5 weeks. This is for the residual short-term fallout and doesn't factor in the effects or possibility of long-term or worldwide fallout. For yields of up to 10 kiloton, prompt or initial radiation is the dominant producer of casualties. Humans receiving an acute dose, 10 gray or higher, will have their performance degraded almost immediately and become ineffective within several hours. The strongest may survive a few days after the exposure, assuming they do not have any other injuries. A dose of 5.3 to 8.5 gray is considered lethal but not immediately incapacitating. Personnel exposed to this amount of radiation have their performance degraded in 2 to 3 hours and remain in this disabled state at least 2 days. But at that point, they will likely experience a recovery period for 6 days or so, and after that time, they would then relapse for about 4 weeks. Then they would begin displaying symptoms of radiation poisoning, and death will follow at approximately 6 weeks after exposure, although outcomes may vary slightly. Knowing how to read a radiation detector, but also knowing how to interpret the data and prepare accordingly is a must for long-term survival and also for the short term in making it to a safe location.
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
gear. Normal survival and bug out gear is assumed here, but the basic necessities should always be on hand. A knife, rope, pack, clothing, food, water purification, light, first aid supplies, basically the standard bug out gear and items. Just refer back to any bug out video for details on basic equipment. Right now we're looking at gear that isn't in everyone's bag, but would be of vital importance, and this is radiation gear. First is a dosimeter or a radiation detector. The difference in the two is a dosimeter is a cumulative measure. So this device is going to record the amount of radiation you're exposed to over a period of time. Although radiation detectors, Geiger counters, do have dosimeters built in on some of the more advanced models. They're more for real-time reading of radiation levels. An NBC CBRN suit, a full-body suit, and not one of the cheap suits. You're going to need something thick here, something good like the examples we see. And this suit alone, though, is not enough. We also need NBC CBRN rated boots. And always remember to tuck your boots into your suit, and don't tuck your suit into your boots and try and take your boots up around your suit. That's going to lead to a bad situation. A hood. If your suit is not equipped with a hood, then you're going to need a hood that's rated for NBC or CBRN. Gloves, the same here, NBC, CBRN gloves. Tape. Placing the gloves under the sleeves of your suit enables you to tape around the wrist area and get a good seal. So tape's an extremely important aspect of this. Without it, then your suit will not be airtight. A rated gas
Monkey,
mask
don't
and
you dare.
filters. A radiation water filter, and some potassium iodine or other preventative medicine. In addition to all this gear, then this is the area that we also need to think more long-term in. Things that we can store in our homes or our bug-out locations that will keep us going for extended periods of time. Also, the need to keep our vehicles in excellent running condition is a top priority. If our vehicles are barely running and a situation does occur, then we're not going to make it far from the area that we need to escape from. So keeping proper maintenance on your vehicles, checking your tire pressure, your oil, making sure they're tuned up, and just making sure that everything is working properly. The last thing we want is a vehicle that's running hot every 10 miles, got slick tires, or is out of oil. This is a very important part of the section to keep our vehicles running as well as we can. At the home or bug out location, make sure that there are means to generate power and to properly store and prepare food and water. Generator power will suffice for a while, but generators wear out, parts break, and fuel sources run low. Solar or wind may be a better option, less moving parts, and due to the fact that they need no fuel source to operate, just wind or light to convert into usable energy. And speaking of fuel, there's another issue that we have to factor in. Storage of this can be difficult and dangerous, so alternative methods could be or may be necessary. Things such as gasifiers, which can turn carbon-based items into usable LP gas and even liquid combustible fuel. Weapons and ammo. These are a crucial part of our gear, not only for personal protection, but for another reason we'll talk about later. Survival skills and health. Survival skills and health will most likely be a very determining factor for a lot of different people. Those that have health conditions that they can really do nothing about, people who are chronically ill, people who have diseases that have to be treated on a regular basis, this is going to be an extremely difficult situation. But for those who can do something about their health, for those that need to drop a few pounds, for those that need to put down the cigarettes, or those that need to just get in better shape overall, then this is something we can do now. This is something we can prepare now. And this isn't just going to help us in a survival situation, but it's going to help us in everyday life. Just getting by will feel much better. But in a survival situation, your body will be able to endure much, much more, and you'll be able to handle the harsh conditions a lot easier. Survival skills are an absolute necessity if you're going to be bugging out. And these are the basic survival skills I'm talking about. Being able to make fire, to purify water, knowing several methods of purification, being able to locate and gain or acquire food, and being able to properly prepare that food. Also being able to build shelter for yourself, simple first aid things. There's some pretty good videos on the channel. Check out about the basic survival skills, but the basic survival skills will be a determining factor for a lot of people. If it's winter or a very cold season and we're bugging out of the city, then someone who doesn't know how to make fire, someone who doesn't know how to build adequate shelter, and someone who isn't prepared may very well not make it through the night. So having these basic survival skills is a must. And these are actually some of the easiest things that we can develop. protect your electronics. There's much debate about the long-range potential of an EMP or nuclear EMP. Some say it will completely destroy all electronics, but there are a lot of factors that are involved with this, such as distance from the EMP, structures that may be in between you and the event, the location of the devices within your home, are the devices powered on or turned off. But one method of protecting your device is the Faraday cage or a similar EMP protective case or box. There are many variants of these devices, but if properly designed, they will shield electronics from these types of events. Although Faraday cages can be constructed with components at home, there are other options, and that's to purchase EMP shielded storage devices. These range in size and price from less than $30 to as much as you'd like to spend. And with a nuclear war, the need for electronic devices such as radiation detectors and other helpful gadgets is extremely high. Protecting these is worth the investment. Your family or your group. Plan for those around you, your family, and your friends who will be accompanying you. Make sure that not only do the people in your group understand the planning you have done, then every member of your group has to already understand and have memorized the various escape routes and rally points, along with the final objective of reaching your bug-out location or retreat. This is crucial because even if just a few of the family members or group members are not familiar with the plans, then there's a good chance that if these people are separated from the group, then finding them in a chaotic, without rule of law environment may not just be difficult, it may be near impossible due to unforeseen factors. Defense in the aftermath. This will come to be a very important aspect after the event has happened. Having the need to not only defend yourself, but also the ones around you will develop shortly afterwards. Whether this need is due to roving gangs and groups that have formed, or because of the pending invasion. If the U.S. is hit with nuclear strikes, then this is most likely a first strike to be followed by airstrikes at precise targets and resulting in a ground invasion. This will inevitably happen no matter the severity of the attacks. If the countries that use nuclear weapons deplete their arsenals and fire all nukes that are available, and even if all targets are hit on both sides of the war, then nuclear weapons will most likely be used, mainly on industrialized nations. It's quite believable to assume that the largest parts of South America, Middle to Southern Africa, and large parts of Asia would not be impacted directly by the blast. So even if the countries launching the weapons destroy each other's military forces, this still leaves the rest of the world that was not hit in the primary exchanges. If this is true, then the areas of the world that were not hit would eventually pursue the nations that were. This is definitely not an absolute eventuality, but a distinct possibility. I'll go much deeper into defensive parameters in the Defense and Tactics series I have on the channel, but for now this is something we have to begin putting thought into if surviving long term is to be possible. But nonetheless, defensive tactics, offensive tactics, weapons, and the ability to implement these are crucial factors in determining the success we experience in this bleak survival situation. Well, there's a lot more we could talk about. There's always more that can be added, more that could be said. But this should serve as a good skeleton plan or outline for preparing for this event. Make sure to keep an eye on the channel for more videos, and don't forget the 50,000 subscriber giveaway that's coming up. Check out the video on the channel page for the details on how to win. It's simple though. Just subscribe, comment, like, and share as many videos as you can. The more you do, the more your odds increase. Thanks a lot for watching, and for now, Serious Survivor, out. EMP, every nation's nightmare. This is a scenario in which we can only contemplate, that we can only theorize about. Although the possible effects are known and mathematically defined, the actual result of a large-scale EMP is still somewhat of a mystery. An electromagnetic pulse is a burst of electromagnetic radiation that results from the detonation of a nuclear weapon and/or a sudden fluctuation of the Earth's magnetic field. The resulting rapidly changing electric fields and magnetic fields couple with electric systems to produce damaging current and voltage surges to power systems, electronics, and information systems. These in turn can seriously impact other important aspects of life. Because of our dependence on electrical power system, its vulnerability to an EMP attack creates the possibility of long-term devastating consequences. A single EMP attack may seriously degrade or shut down a large part of the power grid in the geographic area of the EMP instantaneously. There's also a possibility of functional collapse of grids beyond the exposed area as electrical effects propagate from one region to the other. The E1 pulse, E2, and E3 pulse. The E1 pulse is the early time portion of the EMP, and it arrives at the Earth's surface quickly and lasts about 1 microsecond. It's a fast spike, and its energy is concentrated in the frequency band between 1 to several hundred megahertz. This is a free field energy pulse with a rise time measured in the range of a fraction of a billionth to a few billionths of a second. It is the electromagnetic shock that disrupts or damages electronics-based control systems, communication systems, protective systems, computers, and similar devices. Its damage or functional disruption occurs almost simultaneously over a very large area. The E2 pulse is the intermediate portion of the EMP and covers between 1 microsecond and 0.1 seconds. Its frequency band is between 1 Hz and 100 kilohertz. This middle time component covers roughly the same geographic area as the first component and is similar to a lightning strike, but is far more geographically widespread in its character and somewhat lower in amplitude. In general, it would not be an issue for critical infrastructure systems since they have existing protective measures for defense against occasional lightning strikes. The most significant risk is synergistic, because the E2 component follows a small fraction of a second after the first component's impact. The first component has the ability to impair or destroy the protective and control features of our grid. The energy associated with the second component will then pass into and damage systems further. The E3 pulse is the late time portion of the EMP and occurs between 0.1 seconds and several minutes. This pulse is characterized as a low amplitude, very low frequency signal. This final major component of the EMP is a subsequent slower rising, longer duration pulse that creates disruptive currents in long electricity transmission lines, resulting in damage to electrical supply and distribution systems connected to those lines. The sequence of the E1, E2, and then E3 components of EMP is important because each can cause damage, and the later damage can be increased as a result of the earlier damage. About 70% of the total electrical power load of the United States may be exposed to an EMP event. Determining the range of effects. For equipment to be affected, the weapon needs to be above the visual horizon or the curvature of the Earth. Because of the nature of the pulse, it's doubtful that there would be much protection if the explosion were seen in the sky. The area covered by an EMP is dependent on the altitude of the detonation and the yield of the weapon. Assuming a yield of sufficient strength, 1 megaton or more, the ground coverage can be estimated from this following formula, where RT equals the radius of the affected area in miles, RE is the average radius of the Earth in kilometers, assumed to be 6,370 kilometers. HOB is the height of blast in kilometers. Cosine minus 1 is the arc cosine in radians. And note that this equation is in radians. Devices that will be affected. The first, of course, is the power grid, which in turn will have a cumulative effect on everything else. The electrical power system is the largest single piece of infrastructure in North America. It is this vast array of systems and components all acting in concert, integrated into a cohesive whole to deliver electrical power at the point of use. Major components in the electric power infrastructure. There are three major elements of the electrical power grid. These are the generation, transmission, and distribution. These elements are all dependent on each other, yet distinct in their purpose. Generation. In most circumstances, the first stage of generation converts the original form of energy into rotational mechanical energy that turns a turbine. The turbine then drives a generator. Transmission. The electrical power from the various power plants travels over a system of lines and substations to various regions. Transmission includes lines, wires strung from insulator strings on towers or underground in special insulated containers, and substations, the points where several lines intersect and protection and control functions are implemented. With substations, there are transformers, breakers, protective devices, meters, and data transmitting and control systems. Protective devices protect the electrical components from unusual electrical disturbances that occur from time to time for many different reasons. Distribution. Load or end users of electricity require electrical power to be available in the voltages needed in adequate supply when they need it. This often means in relatively small quantities at low voltage or current. The size of the wires and switches in a typical house are able to be quite small because the power available to that house is restricted to be relatively low. The electrical and electronic appliances similarly need only a small amount of power to be available. Therefore, the high voltage power of the transmission system is reduced or stepped down through the use of transformers and distributed to the end users in levels they need and can use. The control system. The control and protective systems. Overlaid on all three of these primary elements, generation, transmission, and distribution, is a control system that directs the power where it's needed, maintains the frequency, and protects the system. The controls must protect the system from transients such as lightning, correct synchronization errors by activating reactive sources or loads, isolate malfunctioning elements of the grid, and prevent self-damage from improper compensation or human error. These are highly susceptible to the E1 pulse, resulting in degradation of control and protective systems, making the entire system more vulnerable to the following E2 and especially E3 pulse. The integrated electrical power system of the United States and integrated systems in Canada and Mexico is broken into only three truly separate systems at the present time: the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and Texas. The dividing line geographically between the Eastern and Western systems is roughly between Montana and North Dakota, continuing southward. The largest of these, the Eastern Interconnection, serves roughly 70% of the electrical load and population of the United States. The three regions are separated electrically in order to provide barriers for transfer of major frequency deviations associated with system separations. This mode of operation between regions is referred to as maintaining frequency independence. Importantly, this also acts as a barrier to EMP-caused system disruption and any other major system disruption and collapse crossing between these three regions. This is one reason it's theorized it would take 3 EMPs detonated above the United States to take down our entire power grid. Medical devices. Medical devices such as pacemakers and insulin pumps. For those with portable or internal devices such as these, then the situation is much more concerning, because without proper shielding, these devices will most likely fail. Other medical devices are dialysis machines, hospital equipment. The medical devices will be affected immediately. Modern electronics, such as computers, TVs, modern radios, anything with an electronic circuit controlled by an IC using solid-state technology is highly susceptible to the EMP, especially if these devices are plugged in to the outlet. Some of the services that will be lost immediately: telecommunications. When the grid goes down, communications will be the first to go, followed quickly by banking. Our banking systems, with a lack of power and having their servers and their computers basically fried, then most people are going to lose everything that they had in the bank and in any type of investment that they may have owned. And this would include your 401ks and any stock market investments. An immediate grid down situation, which will result in a chain reaction of vehicle accidents to begin with, and this will be due to some of the vehicles stalling, to traffic lights failing, and other traffic indicators failing. It doesn't take an entire highway of vehicles that are damaged by the EMP. It only takes a few to stop traffic indefinitely. Broadcasting and news services will end immediately. Internet access. And this is going to be a very difficult situation for a lot of people, because losing all of the conveniences we have at the touch of our fingertips. I can go to the faucet and turn the water on. I'll flip a light switch, the lights come on, and these services will not be there, just thrusting us back into the 1800s, literally in the blink of an eye. Transportation, and this is referring to public transportation. Public transportation will fail immediately with the electric train cars, electric buses, and systems like that. Public utilities. Of course, with public utilities, the first thing we lose is the electricity. But some larger facilities, when it comes to the water aspect, require power to pump the water from one location to the other. When we lose power to pump the water, then we lose access to water. Medical facilities will be damaged immediately. Although they do have backup generators for the most part, it's the devices inside that fail that are going to make the facilities basically useless, with the exception of the people who are still in there that have the knowledge they have. Police, fire, and emergency services. I expect these to remain in place at least for a little while in the beginning. But with a loss of communications, it's going to make it very difficult for these services to coordinate with one another. And with loss of water pressure soon behind it, the fires are not going to be able to be put out. Grocery stores will close immediately. Even stores with backup power supplies will have to close due to the fact that the grid is down elsewhere, and they will not be able to communicate with any of the banking systems to verify purchases, so these will close immediately. Gas stations will do the same thing. Without any power, gas stations will close immediately due to the inability to pump gas. With the loss of these services, we can expect civil unrest, riots, looting, and burning. Fires will rage out of control without services to fight them. Crime will be rampant, as there will appear to be no consequences of this now. Stores will be emptied within the first few hours or days at the latest. The streets will become a dangerous and even deadly place with little to no law enforcement. We will be left to protect and defend ourselves with only the things we have. Lastly, we could expect to see the country that enacted the EMP attack to quite possibly follow with a nuclear attack or a military invasion. Devices that could survive. Remember, a large portion of the survivability of these items will actually depend on whether or not they are connected to the power grid, or basically plugged in at the moment of the EMP. Of course, mechanical devices. Mechanical devices will survive because they have no electronics or electrical devices within them to damage from the EMP. Analog devices like watches and clocks. Satellites. Some may not think that satellites will survive, but satellites in high Earth orbit have a very good chance of survival. And the reason for this is because outside of the Earth's atmosphere, there is no atmosphere for an electrical current to travel across. So it is only the gamma rays and X-rays that these satellites will be bombarded with from the EMP. Most satellites are already shielded to protect themselves against this type of radiation due to the fact that they are constantly bombarded with this type of radiation from the sun. So if a satellite is not within the range of the blast itself, then there's a very good chance the satellite will survive. Which means in turn, any satellite devices we have that still have a power source of some type and were protected from the initial EMP would allow some means of communication for some people. Older electrical devices, such as devices that use vacuum tubes or even shielded electrical or electronic components, will survive. The older electrical devices tend to be more robust than the ones that are produced today and stand a better chance of survival. The best thing to do with any electrical or electronic devices, if there is any forewarning of the EMP, is to unplug everything from the walls. Unplug everything. Cell phones. Depending on which source you read, some say that cell phones will survive intact through the event, especially if they are not plugged in or charging to the wall. If these devices do survive, we still have the fact that we have no communication towers, no relays. We would have no cell service. So they could function as devices if we had something stored on them, but as far as using them as a means of communication would not be possible. Cars. Studies show that cars without electronics would survive, but studies have also shown that newer vehicles stand an approximate 85 to 90% chance of overall survival. Some damage may occur, but the overall functionality will still be there. There are 2 tests we'll talk about here, and a direct quote from their test. We tested a sample of 37 cars in an EMP simulation laboratory with automobile vintages ranging from 1986 through 2002. Automobiles of these vintages include extensive electronics and represent a significant fraction of autos on the road today. The testing was conducted by exposing running and non-running automobiles to sequentially increasing EMP field intensities. If anomalous response, either temporary or permanent, was observed, the testing of that particular automobile was stopped. If no response was observed, the testing was continued up to the field intensity limits of the simulation capability, which was approximately 50 kilovolts per meter. Automobiles were subjected to EMP environments under both engine turned off and engine turned on conditions. No effects were subsequently observed in those automobiles that were not turned on during EMP exposure. The most serious effect observed on running automobiles was that the motors in 3 cars stopped at field strengths of approximately 30 kilovolts per meter or above. In an actual EMP exposure, these vehicles would glide to a stop and require the driver to restart them. Electronics in the dashboard of one automobile was damaged and required repair. Other effects were relatively minor. 25 automobiles exhibited malfunctions that can be considered only a nuisance, like blinking dashboard lights, and these did not require driver intervention to correct. 8 of the 37 cars tested did not exhibit any response. Based on the test results, we expect few automobile effects at EMP field levels below or 25 kilovolts per meter. Approximately 10% or more of the automobiles exposed to higher field levels may experience serious EMP effects, including engine stall, but this would simply require the driver to restart the engine. Additionally, a 2004 study by the U.S. EMP Commission came to the conclusion that in the event of an EMP, approximately 10% of the vehicles on the road will stop. The common standard used was 2002 to 2004 vehicles as the newest vehicles tested. Although any vehicle from approximately 1994 do have electronic sensors, controls, and similar, these could be affected, but multiple studies say the majority will survive, at least enough to still provide transportation. After 2004, vehicles have become much more complex, and there have Hello, Serious Survivor here. Charges and taxes. Are you even making a profit? CD minted Morgan Silver Dollar. So get in touch with you. Noble Golden Missiles here lately, and they're just testing the new administration to see how far they can push. And they're going to keep pushing until someone pushes back, and hopefully we can push back enough to keep them in check. But if something isn't done to keep them in check, then their weaponry will be a real direct threat to the United States and other allied nations. North Korea has made no secret about what they will do if they have the opportunity with those nukes. It's on their media, we've seen it on our media, and pretty much anywhere you look on the internet if you were to research that subject. Now, if we combine this with their neighbors, China was number 3 in the world for the number of nuclear weapons they had stockpiled, and it was in the hundreds. It's estimated that the 300 nuclear weapons that they reported owning has grown significantly. And with countries like this expanding their nuclear production while ours is actually being curtailed, then this is giving them a distinct advantage with newer and better technology than the years-old missiles that we still have stockpiled. And with missile technology increasing at an alarming rate, then one could assume that a large portion of these missiles are actually capable of avoiding detection or being shot down. We do have a strong missile defense system, but the question is, do we have enough to defend against multiple countries? And that's what we have to take into consideration when we look.
As fears of Russian invasion loom over
through the roof. We're looking at a very difficult time, but there's also things going on in the world that we need to pay attention to. And these are the current affairs with Russia, China, and some of the other nations in the world. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors. Putting your life savings on the stock market right now, despite the dangers? If you've been thinking about investing safer so you can retire comfortably and sleep at night, you could do worse than talking to a Noble Gold expert about the tax advantages and other pluses of precious metal IRAs. Of course, you might just love uncertainty, but if you don't, you can get a free America the Beautiful solid silver 5-ounce coin with any qualifying plan you start. Call 877-646-5347 or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Hypersonic missiles. This is a big threat that a lot of people may not realize how big of a threat this truly is. When we look at our traditional missile defense systems, the missile defense systems in place for long-range or intercontinental ballistic missiles are designed with certain parameters. They're designed to attack the average ICBM, but it's nowhere near the speed of these hypersonic missiles that we're seeing being not just tested, but successfully tested by countries like Russia and China. Meanwhile, the U.S. lags behind on this particular front. Companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin are developing systems that, in theory, can counteract and can possibly deter some of these hypersonic missiles. To be classified as hypersonic, then the missile has to have a speed of Mach 5 or higher, or 5 times the speed of sound. Mach 1 through Mach 5 is supersonic. Hypersonic is Mach 5 and above, which is 3,800 miles per hour plus. And currently, there is no operational defense system that can deny the use of these particular strategic weapons. The problem with these weapons is that they don't take the same flight pattern as the older type ICBMs. When we think about nuclear missiles and we see the movies and we watch TV or whatever, and we see these missiles being launched out of the ground high up into the atmosphere in a very high arcing motion, and then they travel, re-enter the atmosphere, and hit their target. Well, these missiles are traveling much slower than the hypersonic missiles during the middle part of the hypersonic flight. Hypersonic missiles, by design, are ballistic warhead capable. So these are the ICBMs of the future. And the main difference is not just the speed, but the altitude in which they reach. A hypersonic missile travels much lower in the atmosphere, and it's able to guide itself to a degree. It's able to avoid obstacles. It's able to avoid intercept attempts. And these are very highly advanced missiles, and they're able to maintain their flight pattern or deviate from their flight pattern, still reaching their intended target. And the problem is, we don't have missiles now capable of taking these out, not in mid-flight. Now, during the launch phase, when these missiles are first launched from whatever platform they're launched from, during that initial acceleration phase, we do have the ability to take them out, but chances are we won't have assets close enough to stop the initial launches of these types of weapons. During the middle phase, when the missile's reaching its top speeds or close to its top speeds, we have no defense. Not just the United States, but other countries in the world will say the same thing. There is no defense against these in the middle phase. The only opportunity that we have is in the final phase, the termination phase, the phase in which the missile decelerates so that it can hit its target accurately. Then this is what's the scary part is. With a targeted missile, just a conventional warhead missile, it needs to hit its target exactly to do the intended damage. But with a nuclear missile, it does not. With a nuclear weapon, this missile can simply get within a certain vicinity of its intended target and detonate. So even though, in theory, we have the ability to shoot these down on its termination phase, the reality of it is we may not see a termination phase because with powerful nuclear warheads, they don't have to reach their intended target and they simply can explode in midair. U.S. defense officials have stated that they were surprised by the advancement of hypersonic weapons by the Chinese government with the last few missile tests that we've seen or we've been exposed to. The capabilities of the missiles went further than General Milley ever expected, at least according to his own quotes. And at this current moment in time, there is no defense against these particular types of weapons. Now, the U.S. is attempting to design our own. We are testing our own, and we're having a lot of success with that. The problem with this is we are behind. For one of the first times in history, the United States can now say that we are behind China and Russia on this technological aspect. What's so important about that is this particular aspect is nuclear warheads. Countries that are nuclear capable already, especially like the U.S. and Russia, who have the most nuclear warheads in the world. So we will have to maintain those older missile defense systems to defend against those older type nuclear missiles because they are out there and they're probably not going anywhere. And at the latest military conference in Nova Scotia, top U.S. Admiral also stated the same thing that we're saying, is that we are behind on this technology. And this is groundbreaking technology as far as the capabilities of it. These can carry the nuclear warheads faster than any weapon that we've ever used before, and faster than any weapon that we're capable of shooting down. And this should concern a lot of people, especially with what's going on inside our own nation, if we think about it. Even though we're not actually seeing chaos in the streets, and we haven't seen a societal breakdown, but think of the turmoil that we are in right now. And the crazy part about that is it's not the average American, it's not the average citizen that has all of this hatred, that has all of these bad intentions that we see. It's the mainstream media that's pushing a narrative, and we know just as well as anything else, if they say it enough, then people are going to consider it as truth to a degree. A lot of people will, especially the uninformed. So we're in a serious situation, and it's worse than most people probably realize. And that's because most people don't want to realize it. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that we want to be talking about. We don't want to be talking about the possibility of nuclear war. With this type of technology, we could almost be hit before we even knew what happened. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I want you to think, some food for thought here. Think about this. With the United States in turmoil, we're in financial turmoil. We're in a supply chain failure, one that we should not even be in, but we are in a supply chain issue. We're seeing inflation higher than ever before. The average person is finding it more and more difficult to just keep their home and feed their families. But the situation we're in now is going to provide the perfect opening for another country to intervene. If we were to break out in some type of civil conflict, which a lot of people are predicting, a lot of people are pushing for, a lot of people are saying is inevitable at this point. And if we were to break out into a civil conflict, how long do you think it would be before this particular administration would ask for the UN to come in and to help stabilize the situation? You know, we prep as preppers, we prep for grid down, and, we prep for long-term strategies and things like that. But this is a situation coming that no one has the true answer for, and that's just an absolute fact, because no one has experienced what the United States is heading to right now. No one in this country, no one talking about what's happening in this country has experienced where we're headed, because as a U.S. citizen, we lived life a certain way with a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of freedom of speech, a certain amount of the ability to do as we want, as long as we're not, hurting anyone else or breaking any laws, basically. But what we're beginning to see is the breakdown of our rights, with everything from parents at these school board conferences or school board meetings now being labeled as threats, to society, and possibly being labeled as domestic terrorists. We're seeing a crackdown on American citizens who are standing up simply for
What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NY Prepper. You're watching part 1 of the How to Survive a Nuclear War series. And in this series, I'm going to show you guys how to survive a nuclear war. And I'm going to show you guys some realistic things and practical things that you can do to protect yourself in the worst case event of a nuclear war with Russia or China or some other foreign superpower. And I don't think a lot of people talk about this, and I want to really focus on this topic because we just recently had a very close call in Ukraine. We were on the verge of nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine, and I had a lot of people sending me emails and writing comments asking me, how do you survive a nuclear attack and a nuclear war, and how do you build a fallout shelter? What do you do if there's a nuclear war? And so in this video series, I'm going to try to answer all your questions, and hopefully I can help you guys survive nuclear war if it ever were to happen, okay? And hopefully that day never comes, but it seems more and more likely, okay? It seems like nuclear war is basically inevitable at this point, but hopefully it never comes. And if it does come, this video series will help you to survive and make sure that you and your family are okay. So I'm going to show you guys some realistic and practical things that don't cost a lot of money that you can do to protect yourself. And I'm going to show you guys gear. I'm going to show you guys how to build improvised fallout shelters. I'm going to show you guys where you can take shelter if you don't have a fallout shelter in your basement or in your house, or you don't have access to a fallout shelter. I'm going to show you guys some ways that you can protect yourself from radiation, from overpressure, from the blast wave, and from thermal radiation. I'm going to go over everything you can imagine when it comes to protecting yourself from nuclear blasts and nuclear bombs, okay? So in this video, I'm just going to give you guys a very basic overview of nuclear weapons, and I'm going to go through some basic history of nuclear weapons to kind of prime you guys before I get into the more detailed aspects and the bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes of the series, which is, the type of gear that you're going to need, how to build a fallout shelter, where you can find fallout shelters near you, and things like that, okay? But this video, we're just going to give you guys a basic primer on nuclear weapons and understanding of how they work and the history behind them and some of the terminology, because it's very important to understand some basic concepts before you can get into the gear and the fallout shelters and things like that, okay? So You're going to have to bear with me for the first 2 to 3 videos in this series. I'm going to cover just basic concepts and stuff like that. It's going to be more of like a classroom, okay? Think of this as the prepper classroom, okay? And it may not be too exciting, but it's very, very important stuff. So without further delay, let's get started with part 1 of how to survive a nuclear war. The first thing we need to understand is that the only time that nuclear bombs have ever been used in the world was by the United States in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And to this day, those are the only 2 times that nuclear weapons have ever been used by humanity, okay? So that's one thing to remember, is that the United States is actually the one that has used nuclear weapons in combat. Russia hasn't used them in combat yet. China hasn't used them in combat yet. Only America has actually used nuclear weapons in combat, or actually it wasn't in combat, it was against civilian targets in Japan. But so I just wanted to mention that before I get further into the history of nuclear weapons. And there's 2 different types of nuclear weapons that you need to understand, and there's fission and fusion, okay? Those are 2 separate types of nuclear weapons. Fission is the splitting of atoms, and fusion is the fusing of atoms together, okay? When you split atoms apart via nuclear fission, there's a very powerful release of energy, and nuclear fission was the first type of nuclear weapon to be invented, and that was the atom bomb that was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was a fission bomb that used the splitting of atoms, okay? Later on down the line, during the Cold War, something called nuclear fusion was created, and that was the opposite of fission. Whereas in fission you get the energy by splitting the atoms, and in nuclear fusion you get the energy by fusing the atoms together, and when you fuse them together they become unstable and then they release energy, okay? So later on in the Cold War they replaced fission bombs with fusion bombs, and the fusion bombs were on the order of magnitude of hundreds of or thousands of times more powerful than the fission bombs were, okay? The first nuclear weapon ever tested is very, very anemic compared to the type of nuclear weapons that we have today and the type of weapons that were used during the Cold War. The fusion bombs that were deployed during the Cold War were thousands and thousands of times more powerful than the atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we started out with fission weapons, and you can think of fission weapons as like the black powder guns or the musket guns, okay? And then when we invented fusion weapons, that was kind of like the modern sporting rifle, okay? In comparison to the advancement of technology, okay? So the fusion bombs, those are the ones that we use today, and the fusion bombs are many, many, many times more powerful than the fission bombs that were developed during World War II and used on Japan. So that's one thing we have to get out of the way. And so the first nuclear weapon to be developed started in 1939. Okay, that was the Manhattan Project. So let me just write that down for you guys. Fission. Fission is weak and old. It's an outdated technology. Nobody uses fission anymore. Fusion is what we use now, okay? Okay, those are the really powerful weapons. 1939 was when the Manhattan Project started, okay? Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project, if you guys don't know what that is, that was the code name for the secret government project to develop the first nuclear weapon in the history of mankind. Now, many people will argue that the Manhattan Project was not, in fact, the first weapon to be developed, the first nuclear weapon, but it was actually the Germans that developed the first nuclear weapon, but we didn't disclose that information to the rest of the world. But many people believe that the Germans, the Nazis, actually had already invented nuclear weapons before we did. It's just that all that information was kept secret after Hitler died and the Nazi Empire collapsed. The Western governments kept that a secret, but many people believe that the Germans beat us. But nonetheless, if you take what the textbooks tell you in school, the textbooks are going to tell you that America was the first country to develop the atom bomb, and it all started in 1939 with the Manhattan Project, okay? I'm going to read to you guys a little bit in detail about the Manhattan Project. So, in 1939, the U.S. needed a weapon to end the war. The Manhattan Project began modestly in 1939, but grew to employ more than 130,000 people and costed the U.S. nearly $2 billion at the time, and that's the equivalent of $23 billion today. Okay, so it costed $23 billion, the whole project, okay, in equivalent terms of today's money. And they employed 130,000 people. All right, that's absolutely insane, guys. That's like a giant mega bank. You know, think about like Chase Bank or one of these global banks. That's how many people they employ. So that's a massive amount of people working on this project. And specifically, the guy who was the head honcho of the whole project, his name was Robert Oppenheimer. All right, Robert Oppenheimer. A lot of you guys have probably heard of that name, Oppenheimer. So he was the head honcho. He was the brainiac. Okay, this was his project. Okay, he was the boss. He was a nuclear physicist. He was the director of Los Alamos National Labs, and he was the guy who actually designed the first bombs, okay, the first atom bombs by the United States. So he was basically the inventor, okay, he was the inventor. And most of the work on the Manhattan Project actually occurred in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Okay, that's where most of the work on developing the first nuclear weapons occurred in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Okay, and actually today, Oak Ridge, Tennessee is still a very secretive location where nuclear weapons are developed and different types of nuclear technology is experimented with. And for those of you guys that live in Tennessee, Oak Ridge is a major nuclear war target. So if you live anywhere near Oak Ridge, make sure that you have a plan, because this is a primary target for Russia and China in a nuclear war, because this is a very, very strategically important facility at Oak Ridge for nuclear weapons research and development. Okay, so most of the work was done in Oak Ridge by Robert Oppenheimer. Also, some other locations was the Hanford site in Washington State. And the Hanford site today is very, very toxic. And it's basically a ticking time bomb as far as an environmental catastrophe waiting to happen. The Hanford site is where there's a lot of old nuclear waste that was disposed there during the Manhattan Project. And it's a ticking time bomb. So any of you guys that live near the Hanford site in southeastern Washington State, you may want to either relocate or make sure you have a bug out plan, because if something were to ever happen at Hanford, it would be really bad. Okay, and then also UC Berkeley was another location for the Manhattan Project. Okay, all right, University of California, Berkeley. So the first people to discover nuclear fission. Remember, I talked about the fission reaction, which was the first type of nuclear energy that was invented by man, okay, was the fission energy, okay? The first scientists to discover nuclear fission were actually German in 1938, and that was Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, okay? So it was actually the German scientists who actually invented fission first, before we did. And so the Americans at the time were afraid that the Germans were going to beat us in the race to get the first atom bomb. So that's why the Manhattan Project was developed. We wanted to beat the Germans, and we wanted to end the war. We wanted to have a strategic advantage that would give us, leverage over the Germans, okay? So the Germans had their own atom bomb project, okay? And they were already in the process of researching the atom bomb. But most of the nuclear material that they used during the Manhattan Project was sourced from Colorado, the Northwest Territories in Canada, in Czechoslovakia, and in the Belgian Congo. Okay, that's where most of the uranium was mined. Okay, the uranium was taken out of Colorado, northern Canada, the Carpathian Mountains, and the Belgian Congo. All right, now Robert Oppenheimer is called the father of the atomic bomb, and the first atomic bomb in human history was tested on July 16th, 1945, okay? So I'm going to write this down for you guys now. You can take a screenshot of this if you want, and we're going to move on to the next section here, okay? We're going to talk more about the atom bombs themselves, okay? So let's continue on here. So first atom bomb tested July 16, 1945, okay? And this bomb was tested in a remote desert location in, let me write it down for you guys, Alamogordo, New Mexico, okay? That's the first nuclear test, okay? First successful nuclear test. This was the Trinity test, okay? And the mushroom cloud was so high that it went up 40,000 feet in the air, which is taller than Mount Everest. Mount Everest is 29,000 feet. The mushroom cloud from the Trinity test was 40,000 feet, okay? 40,000 feet. That was the first bomb. That's how powerful it was. We're talking about the first bomb here. That's how insanely powerful these bombs were. All right. So it was conducted. The test was conducted at 5:30 a.m. on July 16th, 1945. It was 35 miles southeast of Socorro, New Mexico, on what was then the U.S. Air Force Alamogordo Bombing and Gunnery Range, now part of White Sands Missile Range. Okay? And then shortly after the Trinity test, that's when we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th. Okay? August 6th and August 9th, 1945 was when we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima. Okay? I'm just going to clean this up a little bit for you guys. I know this is a little bit of like a classroom setting, but we're going to get more into the meat and potatoes of how to prepare for nuclear war and how to survive nuclear war. But first, in order to survive nuclear war, we have to have a background. Okay, so this is our background. This was Hiroshima. August 6th, and then this one was Nagasaki, okay? Hopefully you guys can see that, all right? So literally 1 month after the first nuclear bomb was ever tested in the Trinity test, 1 month later, not even 1 month, actually like 3 weeks later, we dropped 2 bombs on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Together, both of these bombs killed between 130,000 to 230,000 people. Okay? All right, so 130 to 230,000 people dead from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Okay, these were the very first bombs ever created, and the only bombs ever used in actual combat or actually deployed. All right, that's a lot of people, guys. That's like the entire city of Buffalo, New York, dead. Okay. And most of those people were civilians, all right? So moving on from the fission bombs, these were the OG, if you will, all right? These were the original gangsters. Moving on from the fission bombs and World War II, we're going to move on to the fusion bombs, which were the super powerful bombs, all right? So let me just clear this board here, and we'll talk about the fusion bombs a little bit and the Cold War. All right, guys, so we have Ivy Mike, which was the first test of a thermonuclear weapon. And this test was done on November 1st, 1952. And this was a fusion bomb, okay? November 1st, 1952, okay? And this was a nuclear fusion bomb, and it was detonated by the United States on the island of Ilu Gelab in the Eniwetok Atoll, okay? And the U.S. would end up testing many weapons in the Bikini Atoll area in the Marshall Islands. That was a very popular testing area for fusion bombs, all right? So this is part of the Marshall Islands, all right? So Ivy Mike was the first fusion bomb, okay, ever tested, November 1st, 1952. And the fusion bombs, like I said, they get their energy by fusing the atoms together. And when you fuse the atoms together, it creates a lot of instability, and that releases a massive explosion, okay? Now, thermonuclear bombs is just another word for a fusion bomb, okay? So when you hear the word thermonuclear weapon, that's basically a fusion bomb, all right? Now, many fusion bombs are actually ignited, if you will, by fission bombs, okay? So the actual fusion bomb and the radioactive material for the fusion bomb is surrounded by a fission bomb. And the fission bomb is detonated first, and the fission bomb is what creates the compression that's needed to fuse the two materials together and fuse the atoms together in order to detonate the actual fission part of it, okay? So it's almost like a two-stage explosion, okay? It's kind of like a rifle bullet, okay? A rifle cartridge or a pistol cartridge. You have your primer, and then you have your gunpowder, okay? When the firing pin hits the primer ignites, it explodes. There's a little bit of explosive material inside of a cartridge primer. And when that primer goes off, it sets off the gunpowder, and the gunpowder sends the bullet out of the barrel, okay? So think about a fusion bomb as a rifle cartridge, okay? You have the nuclear fusion material at the core of the bomb, And on the outside of the fusion material, you have your fission bomb, okay? And the fission bomb triggers the fusion bomb to go off, because in order to fuse atoms together, you need tremendous amounts of energy to do that, okay? In order to compress atoms together, plutonium and uranium, you need massive amounts of pressure and heat and things like that, okay? And the only way to reach those levels of pressure and heat is to use a fission bomb, okay? So the fission bomb is the primer for the fusion bomb, okay? So I'm going to go through some popular nuclear bombs that were tested and used, and I'm going to list out some of their explosive power, okay? All right, guys. So I want to just share the units of explosivity that are used to determine how powerful a nuclear bomb is. So you have kilotons and megatons, okay? 1 kiloton is equal to 1,000 tons of TNT, okay? 1,000 tons. Think about how many, think how much TNT that is. TNT meaning dynamite, okay? 1,000 tons of dynamite is 1 kiloton. And then you have megatons. 1 megaton is equal to 1,000 kilotons, okay? So when the first fission bombs were invented, they were using the kilotons to determine how powerful they were, okay? Specifically, the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were around 20 kilotons, okay? So that's the equivalent of 20,000 tons of dynamite, okay? 20,000 tons of dynamite. That's how powerful the Hiroshima and Nagasaki explosions were. Think about how much explosion you get from just one stick of dynamite, okay? And then you have megatons, which were used when the fusion bombs came out. They were using megatons because kilotons were just too small of a unit to classify the power of the bombs. So then they came up with megatons, and 1 megaton is 1,000 kilotons, okay? So then you're looking at 1 megaton is 100,000, I'm sorry, not 100,000, is 1 million tons of dynamite. 1 megaton is 1 million tons of dynamite, okay? Think about that for a minute, 1 million tons. Just let that sink in, and that's just 1 megaton, all right? Now, the largest bomb that was ever tested in human history was the Tsar bomb, which was 50 megatons, okay? But these bombs are extremely powerful, guys. So I'm going to list the power of a lot of these common bombs that are well known throughout history, so you guys can get an understanding of how powerful they were. All right, guys, so here's the most common nuclear bombs that you need to be familiar with and their explosive power. So you have the Trinity test, which was the first atom bomb, like I mentioned. This was the first atom bomb, first nuclear bomb ever tested, was 22 kilotons, okay? 22,000 tons of dynamite in terms of how powerful it was. So even the first bomb is enough to level an entire city, and that was just the first bomb, okay? Then we went to Ivy Mike, which was the first fusion bomb. That one was 10 megatons, okay? Then we had Hiroshima, was 18 kilotons. Nagasaki was 22 kilotons. And then we have Castle Bravo, which was 15 megatons. Castle Bravo was the most powerful fusion bomb that was ever detonated by the United States, and that was 15 megatons. And then we have the Tsar bomb, which was 50 megatons, okay? And the Tsar bomb is the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated in human history, okay? The Tsar Bomb. The Tsar Bomb, if you guys want to take a guess what country that Tsar Bomb was from, and it's Russia, okay? The Tsar Bomb was detonated in northwestern Russia above the Arctic Circle, and the bomb was so powerful that it caused windows to shatter hundreds of miles away in Norway. About 500 miles away from where the bomb was detonated, people in Norway reported having windows in their homes getting busted by a pressure wave. Okay, 500 miles away. That's like dropping a bomb on New York City and you being all the way in North Carolina getting your windows broken from that. Okay, that's how powerful the Tsar Bomb was. All right, and now there is rumors that Russia has even 100 megaton and 200 megaton warheads, okay, that they haven't actually tested, but they built. And originally, when Russia was going to test the Tsar Bomb, they actually had a 100 megaton warhead that they wanted to actually test, but they realized that the test would have been too dangerous for the pilots that were dropping the bomb, because the explosion was so powerful that the pilots who were flying the plane to drop the bomb would not have enough time to get away from the explosion. So they decided to do a 50 megaton instead, but they actually did have a 100 megaton bomb that they were planning to test, okay? But they scrapped it because they said it was just way too powerful, and they didn't want to lose their men, and they didn't want to lose their bombers, okay? But the Tsar Bomb was actually dropped off from a bomber plane, okay? It was loaded onto a bomber plane, like a heavy bomber, and it was extremely heavy and massive, and they had to use a very heavy-duty bomber plane, and they flew it over to the Arctic Circle in northwestern Russia, and they dropped it, and the bomb was so powerful that the pilots could barely escape the shockwave. By the time the bomb hit the ground, and they barely made it out. They almost got killed, okay? So, all right, so that's a little bit of the history of the bombs and, basic understanding of them. And now we're going to move on to the specifics of how a nuclear weapon actually works and the components of nuclear weapons. We're going to get more detailed with that. All right, guys, so now we're going to talk about the basic components of a nuclear missile. And the basic component of a nuclear weapon or a nuclear missile is you have your warhead, which is at the front of the missile, and then you have the actual missile itself, which propels the warhead to the target. So your missile is basically your rocket, okay? This is just a rocket, and the rocket, think about it like the boosters that the space planes use to get into space. It is just a rocket, okay? It's a rocket that has a lot of highly powerful fuel inside of it, and the fuel can accelerate this missile to 20 times the speed of sound. And on the tip of the missile, you have your nuclear warhead, okay? The nuclear warhead is where the actual bomb is located, okay? So that's just a very basic sketch of what a nuclear weapon looks like. So the main types of nuclear weapons that we're going to have to deal with if there's a nuclear war is you're going to most likely be dealing with ICBMs, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, that's what ICBM stands for. ICBMs have a range of 3,000 miles or greater, roughly, okay? That's why it's called intercontinental, okay? This is the type of missile that Russia would launch to the United States, or the United States would launch to Russia. It's a missile that is able to traverse multiple continents, or from one continent to the other. So we're going to say about 3,000 miles or greater. Underneath the ICBMs, you have IRBMs, which are intermediate range ballistic missiles. And these have a range of between 500 miles and 3,000 miles, okay? So an intermediate range ballistic missile is still a pretty long range missile, but it's not designed to go across the ocean or across to another continent. It's designed to stay within the same continent, all right? Then you have SLBMs, which stand for Submarine Launched Ballistic Missile. And an SLBM is basically just an ICBM or an IRBM that's launched out of a submarine, okay? These submarines are very large. They're the largest submarines that have ever been created. In the United States, the submarines that launch SLBMs are called Ohio-class subs, okay? And we have about, officially the government says that we have about 20 Ohio-class subs. So we have a lot of Ohio-class subs, and we have the most submarine-launched ballistic missiles of any country in the world, okay? And we have the most submarines that are capable of launching SLBMs of any country. We have about 20 of them, and Russia has less than 5, okay? So we have 4 times the amount of submarines that are able to launch ICBMs than Russia does, okay? We have about 20. Russia has less than 5. And each one of these Ohio-class subs can launch up to 20 ICBMs or 20 IRBMs, okay? So that's a lot. So if you add that up, let's say you have 20 subs, and each of them can, let's say, launch about 20 nuclear weapons. You're talking about 400 nuclear weapons that these subs can launch, okay? That's very powerful. And we'll talk more about those in the next part in the series. In part 2, we'll talk about the submarines and how they function in a nuclear war, because it's very important. And then finally we have SRBMs, which are short-range ballistic missiles. These typically have a range of less than 500 miles, and these are very popular in Russia and in Europe, in the Middle East. These are the types of missiles that you use when you have a target that's obviously close to you. And these were very heavily deployed in the Cold War in Europe and Russia. Specifically, Russia had a lot of SRBMs because they were right on the border with Europe, okay? The Soviet Union went all the way to Berlin. So they had deployed a lot of SRBMs during the Cold War, which could reach targets in France and Britain and Spain and Western Europe. Okay, so SRBMs are not really that popular anymore, but in some areas of the world, they're still a problem, especially in Eastern Europe. There's a big threat from Russia with the SRBMs. They have a lot of Iskander ballistic missiles that they've deployed to the border of NATO, specifically in the Kaliningrad exclave in the Baltic area. And they've also deployed Iskander missiles in Belarus and Crimea, okay? So SRBMs are another one, but these are not really a threat for us here in the United States. These are a threat if you live in Eastern Europe. This is a big problem for you. If you live in the Baltic countries, if you live in Scandinavia, if you live in Poland, Romania, Ukraine, any of the Eastern European countries, the former Soviet satellites, are within striking distance of Russian SRBMs, okay? But here in the U.S., we don't really have to worry about that. Now, we have to talk about the different types of fuel for a nuclear missile, okay, or nuclear weapon. You have, like I said, you have the rocket, and then you have the nuclear warhead. So the rocket has to be propelled by something, right? And I talked about how it has a very, very powerful fuel source that helps to propel it to the speed of 20 times the speed of sound. Okay? So in order to propel those nuclear weapons to 20 times the speed of sound and to get them to go over 3,000 miles, you need some pretty powerful fuel. And the two different types of fuel that they use is what's known as solid fuel or liquid fuel. Now, liquid fuel is an older technology. This was the first type of fuel for rockets back in World War II when the Germans created the V-2 rocket. They use liquid fuel. This is a very primitive technology, liquid-fueled rockets, okay? Pretty much all of modern ICBMs and IRBMs and SLBMs are solid fuel, okay? Very rarely is liquid fuel used anymore. And the reason why is that liquid-fueled missiles, they have to be fueled up like a car right before they're deployed, okay? So, and the liquid fuel can go stale and get bad after a while. So you have to constantly rotate the fuel. You have to fuel it up before you want to launch, which takes time. And if we're talking about, let's say, a nuclear war where, you know, you have to deploy a missile right away. If, let's say, Russia launches missiles at us and we have to launch back at them, we're not going to have time to, you know, start fueling up our rockets because we have to launch our rockets right away. So that's the downside to liquid fueled rockets, is that you have to fuel them up before they launch, okay? Now, some countries still use liquid fueled nukes, okay? North Korea in particular uses a lot of liquid fueled nukes, okay? And that's because North Korea has more primitive technology and they don't have enough money, but they're starting to get solid fueled rockets. And there was the one rocket that they tested, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, where they shot the rocket up into the air like 2,000 miles, and then it went down and it landed in the Sea of Japan. That was most likely a solid fueled rocket, okay, or solid fueled missile. So the modern missiles of today use solid fuel because it doesn't go bad. You can fuel up the missile and let it sit there for decades and it'll still launch, okay? Versus liquid fuel, just like your car, okay, you can't just leave gas in the tank of your car for years and years. You have to rotate the gas, otherwise it's going to go bad, okay? So these are just some basic overviews of the different types of nuclear weapons. Solid fuel can pretty much stay forever, and then liquid fuel, you have to refuel it and rotate it, okay? And most of the modern nuclear arsenal is composed of ICBMs and IRBMs, okay? We don't really use SRBMs anymore, except Russia, maybe Pakistan, maybe Iran, maybe Israel, maybe North Korea, all right? But if we're talking about superpowers, most superpowers, they're more focused on ICBMs, IRBMs, and SLBMs, okay? Because these are the ones that give you a strategic advantage over other countries. If you have ICBMs, IRBMs, and SLBMs, that puts you on an upper level, okay? That puts you above everybody else, okay? And the bigger your arsenal is of these weapons, the more powerful you're going to be on the global stage, okay? So these are the weapons that we judge the nuclear powers by and how powerful a country's nuclear arsenal is, okay? We judge them by these, all right? So I just want to show you guys some more details of how a nuclear missile actually works. All right, guys, so here's our nuclear missile, our nuclear weapon that's heading for the United States, coming from Russia or China. Let's talk about how this actually works, okay? So here you have one country here, and here you have another country here, okay? Let's say this is Russia, or let's say this is Russia here, and this is USA, all right? Let's say Russia wants to launch a missile at the USA. The way that nuclear weapons work is that the weapon goes up into the air, okay? It goes up into the air, and it reaches what's known as an apex, all right? And when the missile reaches the apex, the warhead falls down towards its target, and the warhead has steering mechanisms to guide it towards its target, okay? So most of the rocket is expended by the time it gets to the apex. Once the missile reaches the apex, 90% of the rocket fuel has been burnt up, and there's only a little bit of fuel left, and that little bit of fuel is enough to steer the warhead down to the target, okay? So if we're looking at the missile here, okay, you can see that I have this missile drawn into different segments, okay? And this is a very important concept. So if this missile like this is launched from Russia, okay, you're going to have let's say 4 or 5 different segments. As the missile comes up, it's going to start to shed these segments, okay? Each one of these segments is loaded with rocket fuel, okay? And as the missile goes up to the apex, it burns up the rocket fuel from each one of these segments, okay? And by the time it reaches the apex, most of these segments are gone, and the only thing left is your warhead and maybe just a little bit of rocket fuel to steer the warhead down to the target, okay? Because once the warhead reaches the apex, most of the work has already been done, all right? When you're launching a missile, you're fighting gravity, okay? And this is where most of the energy is expended, is to get that missile up into the sky and get it up above your target. And once it's up above your target, then all you need to do is let that warhead go down to the earth and fall down, okay? And when it's falling down, you don't really need a lot of fuel, okay, because gravity is pushing it down, but you do still need a little bit of fuel to steer the warhead to the specific target that you want it to go to. All right, so if we're looking at this missile here, by the time, if this is the missile that's fired up into the sky and we're trying to hit the US, okay, most of these segments are going to be used up by the time we get to the apex. And then there may just be one segment left. So 3 of these segments will be expended by the time we get to the apex. And as the rocket is going up, it drops off each one of these segments as it reaches certain heights, okay? So they just fall off at certain points in the sky. Once it gets to a certain point, one of these segments will fall off. Once, let's say, all the fuel is consumed in this segment here, this segment comes off, and these 3 segments continue going, and then another one falls off, and then once it gets to the apex, there's just maybe one segment of fuel left, and that segment helps to steer the warhead down to the target. And the warhead is where the actual bomb is, okay? So that's a very important concept to understand. And when they fire these missiles, they fire them up high into the sky, okay? They don't fire them low, okay, like a cruise missile, all right? This would be, let's say, like a Tomahawk missile, flies very low to the ground. Nuclear weapons, they go very high up they basically go into space, okay? They go outside of the atmosphere. They go out into space, and then once they get up into space, they can fly over the country that they want the bomb to land on, and then they can steer that warhead down to a specific target, okay? And the reason why the missiles are launched up so high in the air, there's a few reasons. Number one, it's very difficult to intercept a missile like this, okay? The reason why is that, let's say, for example, Russia and the United States were, let's say we're 5,000 miles apart, okay, between Russia and the U.S., okay? If Russia was to fire a missile like this, more of like a horizontal track, it would get there faster, okay, but we would be able to shoot it down. We would be able to intercept it easier, okay? But by firing the missile up into the atmosphere or outside of the atmosphere, it's almost impossible for us to intercept this missile because it's such a huge distance away that by the time our interceptors can reach this area here, this missile is already, way past the point of interception. Okay, so this is done for a reason. It's done to eliminate the possibility of being intercepted. So Russia can literally launch a missile up into space, and they can stay at a safe distance away from the U.S. And then once the missile is in space, then it can cruise a little bit in space once it gets closer to the U.S., and then it can go back down and hit its target. Okay. Now there is some technology now called space-based missile interceptors, which are interceptor missiles that hang out on satellites in space, and the satellites have missiles that they can launch to intercept the ICBMs when they're up in space. But that's not a proven technology, and we don't really know much about it yet. Okay. So continuing on with how the nuclear weapons work, we're going to talk about the warheads now. So now we're going to cover a very important topic that you need to understand about nuclear war and warheads that a lot of people don't understand. And this is how the actual warheads work and the different types of warheads, okay? So originally, when nuclear weapons were first developed, like in World War II, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, the early Cold War weapons, the Castle Bravo, Ivy Mike, and the Tsar bomb, okay? These were all just really powerful single warheads, okay? And that's what you see here, okay? This missile represents a nuclear weapon that has one powerful warhead, okay? And that was the original, this is the old-fashioned original design, is to have a missile with one warhead on it, and that warhead hits one target, okay? But eventually, as time went on, human beings, naturally we want to make things better, and we're always thinking, and we realize that why should we only have one warhead on one missile when we could put 10 or 20 warheads on one missile? And this is a huge leap in terms of nuclear weapons, okay? It's just as big of a leap as going from fission to fusion. And so here we have what's known as the MIRV. The MIRV stands for Multiple Independent Reentry Vehicle, okay? And these are the types of nuclear weapons that most modern nuclear powers have, specifically the United States and Russia, okay? And Israel and possibly China as well. All right, MIRVs are the modern nuclear weapon, okay? These types of singular giant warheads are no longer used, and there's a lot of reasons why, okay? And I'm going to explain to that. I'm going to explain to you guys that the reasons why. So when you have a one missile with one warhead, even if it's a really powerful warhead, the problem is it's much easier to intercept, okay? When you have one missile with one warhead, all it takes is one interceptor missile to intercept this missile, and it's out of the fight. It's gone, okay? So that's a problem, because if, let's say, you have 500 missiles and the enemy has 500 interceptor missiles, it's pretty easy for them to shoot these missiles out, okay? And if these get taken out, you're screwed, okay? But with the MIRVs, you have up to 15 or 20 warheads on one missile, okay? And each one of these warheads can target different targets, okay? So military planners and generals, they realized at some point later on in the Cold War that they didn't need to have these gigantic nuclear bombs. They actually realized that they only needed very, very smaller bombs, like the size of the Hiroshima bombs, or even smaller than the Hiroshima bombs. Okay, they didn't need these massive, 50 megaton bombs that were going to just totally obliterate everything within 100 miles. they realized that they didn't need that, okay? What they needed was nuclear warheads that were smaller that could target specific targets that were very important to the enemy country, okay? So let me give you an example, okay? Think about strategic military bases, very important, let's say relocation bunkers for the presidents and VIPs of an enemy country, very important military bases, any kind of very strategic targets, you don't need to have a huge explosion to take those targets out. And so military planners realized that they would rather have a lot of smaller warheads that they could use to target, let's say, hundreds of military bases of, let's say, the United States or Russia. Let's say if Russia wanted to take out the U.S., the Russian generals realized that it's more productive to have, let's say, 10,000 small nukes than it is to have 100 big nukes. Because with those 10,000 small nukes, they could target military bases and critical infrastructure and cities and dams, and they can basically bring an entire country to its knees without having to obliterate, the entire civilian population. They can just strategically and surgically drop nukes on military bases and decapitate the entire military of the enemy country by doing that, okay? So they realized that having MIRVs was a better idea, okay? And so what they did was they put multiple warheads onto one missile. So what this does is it also makes it harder to intercept, okay? Because now you have one missile that has 10 different warheads. So thinking back to my previous drawing of the apex, when this missile reaches the apex, it opens up at the top here and it deploys all these warheads, and each one of these warheads goes to different targets. Okay, so you don't need as many missiles to hit a lot of targets. You could have 100 missiles, and with 100 missiles you can hit 1,000 targets if each one of your missiles has 10 warheads on it, okay? So this is the new technology, MIRVs, multiple independent reentry vehicles. And when you have that many little warheads, they're harder to intercept, okay? Because thinking back to the giant Tsar bombs and the Castle Bravos, let's say you only have 100 nukes and you launch those warheads. If you only have 100 of them, it's easier to intercept because there's not that many of them. But if you have MIRVs, where you have a lot of smaller nukes, and each missile has 10 or 20 smaller nukes, if you do the math, if there's let's say you launch 100 missiles, and each one of those missiles has 20 warheads, that's 2,000 warheads that need to be intercepted, and that's basically impossible. No matter how good your technology is, it's impossible to intercept that many amount of warheads, okay? And on top of that, each one of these smaller warheads can have countermeasures to fool any kind of interceptors, okay? So you have one missile with, let's say, 10 warheads, and each one of those warheads is going to different targets, and each one of those warheads has decoys like chaff and hot air balloons, okay, mylar balloons. And what these do are to fool the interceptors that are trying to take out these warheads. They deploy a mylar balloon that's inflated with hot air, and that creates a heat signature. And the heat signature from that mylar balloon is going to create another target for the interceptor, because the interceptor doesn't know if the hot air balloon is a real nuke or if it's not, okay? So, you have 10 warheads, and each one of the warheads has a hot air balloon with it, and chaff. Chaff is for radar, okay? It fools the radar and stuff. But let's say each one of these warheads has a mylar balloon in it. Now you have double the amount of targets for the for the interceptors, okay? Because before you had, let's say, 10 warheads that needed to be shot down before they land and hit their targets. When you introduce hot air balloons, now you may have 20 or 30 targets, okay? So the hot air balloons, the mylar balloons create extra heat signatures for the interceptors, and the interceptor has to shoot down all of the heat signatures because they don't know which one is a real warhead and which one is a balloon. Okay, so that's why the MIRVs are such a powerful technology. All right, guys, so now I want to talk about how many nuclear weapons all the superpowers of the world have. And contrary to popular opinion, actually Russia is the #1 threat for a nuclear war. And the reason why is if you look at these numbers, you can see that China only has 350 nuclear weapons, and Russia has the most nuclear weapons in the entire world. And this information comes from the Federation of American Scientists, and I believe this was from 2019 or 2020, but they update this tally every year. And obviously, the Federation of American Scientists, they don't have all the information. They're just taking their best guesses, okay? But based on the Federation of American Scientists, it's actually Russia that has the most nuclear weapons in the entire world, okay? Right behind Russia, you have the US, and then you have China. But look at the difference between China and the US and Russia. China only has 350 nuclear weapons, and Russia and the US have over 6,000 or 5,000, okay? So Russia has 6,257 nuclear weapons, and 1,600 of them are deployed. So what that means is that out of the 6,250 weapons that they have, 1,600 of those are ready to be launched at a moment's notice. The U.S., right behind Russia, has 5,550 nuclear weapons, and we have 1,000 deployed, okay? So we have 1,000 nukes ready to go at a moment's notice. They're ready to be launched. China has only 350 nuclear weapons, and that's the reason why Russia and China are becoming really close allies now, okay? Because China realizes that they need Russia for their protection, okay? Because China doesn't have enough nuclear weapons to protect itself from the United States. So China needs Russia for their nuclear weapons, and Russia needs China for their economy, okay? Because Russia has economic problems, and they've always had like a not the best economy, okay? Russia has always struggled economically, especially since the Cold War, okay? So Russia needs China for the commerce, and they do a lot of business with China. They sell a lot of resources to China because China has a lot of people. They have the most people in the world, and China doesn't have a lot of natural resources because it's a small country, and it's mostly barren desert in the western side of China. So China needs Russia for their resources, and Russia needs China for the commerce and economy, and China needs Russia for the nuclear weapons, okay? So only 350 from China. So what that means is that if there ever was to be a nuclear war, the biggest threat is Russia, okay? It's pretty much the same thing as the Cold War. You know, we're taught in school that the Cold War ended, but it really never ended, okay? We're still in a Cold War right now, okay, with Russia, all right? Russia and the U.S. have the most nuclear weapons, and if there's ever going to be a nuclear war, it's going to be between Russia and the United States, okay? China's not going to have enough nuclear weapons to really do anything to us, all right? Behind China, you have France with 290 nukes. UK has 195 nukes. and the UK is actually a big customer of the United States, and the UK gets most of their nukes from us. They specifically, the UK has a lot of Trident missiles, and Trident missiles are the submarine-launched ballistic missiles that I talked about earlier. All right, they have a lot of Trident missiles, and they have a lot of submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and they have a lot of submarines that can launch the Tridents, okay, which are SLBMs. Okay, so that's most of the UK's arsenal is SLBMs, Trident missiles. India, 160 nukes. Israel has 90, and the DPRK, which is North Korea, has 40. Okay, now some of these numbers could be a little bit off. You could also throw Pakistan in there, and Pakistan could also have maybe 100 nukes or so. It's possible that Israel has more than 90. It's possible that North Korea has more than 40. But more or less, this is going to be fairly accurate. All right, we're looking at just a general, general amount here, and you can see that Russia and the U.S. are way above the rest of the world. Okay, way above. So if there's ever to be a nuclear war, it's going to be between Russia and the United States. So now we're going to discuss a very critical concept in nuclear war, and that's what's known as the nuclear triad, okay? This is a very, very important concept that you guys need to understand. And the nuclear triad is basically just a fancy term for nuclear weapons that can be deployed from land, sea, and air, okay? So when a country has a nuclear triad, that means that they can deploy nuclear weapons from land, from sea, and from the air, okay? And so far, the only true nuclear triad country is the United States, okay? The United States is the only country in the world that has a true nuclear triad. And the reason why the nuclear triad is so important is if there's ever a nuclear war, okay, it's good to have a variety of ways to deploy the nuclear weapons, okay? Because let's say, for example, if Russia were to launch nukes at our land-based nuclear weapons and destroy them and take out our land-based nukes, we still have nukes in the ocean, and we have nukes that we can drop from the sky. So it would be very difficult for Russia to eliminate all of our nukes, because they would have to target our land-based nukes, they would have to target our submarines, which we have 20 of them, and those submarines are nuclear powered, so they can stay underwater indefinitely. They could be anywhere in the world, and we can launch those nukes from anywhere, any ocean in the world. And so we're going to have the sea as a backup and the air as a backup as well, okay? In case Russia were to take out our land-based nukes, we have our Ohio-class subs and Trident missiles, and then we have our B-2 stealth bombers here, which are going to drop the bombs from the sky, okay? So the nuclear triad ensures survivability in a nuclear war. It ensures the survivability of our nuclear arsenal, so this way the enemy can't destroy our entire nuclear arsenal in one giant strike, okay? Because if all we had were land-based nukes, all right, let's say we didn't have our Ohio-class subs, let's say we didn't have our B-2 bombers, okay? Let's say all we had was land-based nukes. Everything we had was in a silo, okay? Let's say they were all in silos, okay? All of our nukes were in silos, okay? If Russia has satellites, Russia has intelligence planes, just like we do, okay? If all we had were land-based silos, they could just target those silos with nuclear weapons as their initial strike, okay? Russia would already know where our silos are through satellites, through reconnaissance planes. They already know where 70% of our silos are, okay? So if all we had were the silos in the beginning of the nuclear war, Russia would just have to target those silos and take them out. And once they take out our silos, we have nothing, okay? It's kind of like if you get into a fight with a boxer and the boxer only knows how to use his fists and he can't kick, he can't wrestle, he can't grapple, he doesn't know anything else but how to punch. If you grab that boxer's arms and you dislocate his shoulders or break his arm, he's useless, okay? And that's basically what the nuclear triad prevents, okay? It prevents our entire nuclear arsenal from being wiped out in one giant strike, okay? So if we go back to the boxer example, okay, I'm going to just make this very easy to understand for you guys. So let's say you're not only a boxer now, but you can kickbox, you can throw some kicks, and you can wrestle, okay? Now, if somebody grabs your arm and breaks your arms and your arms don't work anymore, you can still throw a kick. You can still try to take somebody down and choke them out, all right? But if all you know how to do is box, if your arms are taken out of the fight, you're useless, okay, because you don't know anything else. So a nuclear triad, you have land, sea, and air. And the U.S. is the only country that has a full nuclear triad, okay? And a critical component to the nuclear triad is having stealth bombers. And that's what sets us apart from Russia, okay, is that we have very advanced stealth bombers, all right? And the stealth bombers give us a true air delivery system where we can drop a nuke anywhere in the world and not be detected by enemy defenses, air defenses, and anti-aircraft systems. So the stealth bomber is a critical component of the nuclear triad, and that's what Russia lacks and that we have a lot of. We have a lot of stealth bombers, and we also have a lot of Ohio-class subs, okay? And Russia doesn't have them, okay? Russia, like I said, only has a few subs that they can launch SLBMs from, and they don't have any stealth bombers yet that we know about, but they do have regular bombers that are not stealthy that they can launch weapons from or drop bombs from. But those bombers do not give a true air capability because we can easily shoot those bombers out of the sky, okay? But with our stealth bombers allow us to penetrate enemy airspace that's heavily guarded with anti-aircraft systems, and we can drop those bombs deep into the deep behind enemy lines, okay? And that's not something that a regular bomber can achieve because the regular bomber would be immediately shot down. So the U.S. is the only true nuclear triad country, but Russia is also not far behind us, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Russia's capabilities now. They're a little bit different, and the reason why they're different is because of the geography of Russia and the U.S. We have different terrain, and so we adapted to our terrain differently than Russia did, and that's why Russia has different delivery systems than we have, okay? And their nuclear triad is not the same as ours. They don't have the same capabilities as ours because their terrain is different, their location is different. For example, the United States, we're surrounded by many, many oceans, and we have water all around us. We have the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean on both sides of us, and we also have the Arctic Ocean on top. Okay, so we're surrounded by water, and because we're surrounded by water, we developed a very strong sea-based delivery system with our Ohio-class subs because we realized that we have all this water around us. That's another reason why we have such a well-developed Navy, because we have so much water around us. We're surrounded by water, basically. So we need to have a sea-based delivery system, and we need to have a good Navy because we're surrounded by water. Same thing with the air, okay? We're far away from any enemies, so we have to be able to deliver bombs by air. Russia's a little different. Russia doesn't have as much water around them. They have, on one side they have Europe, and then on the other side they have the Pacific, and then to the south they have Asia, okay? They have China, they have Afghanistan, and all the Stan countries, you know, all those Middle Eastern countries. So they have more land-based systems than we do because they have more land, okay? If you think about it that way, they're a very large country. They have a lot of dense forest cover, and they use that forest cover to their advantage to hide their silos, okay? Meanwhile, we can't hide our silos as much because most of America, especially the western 2/3 of America, once you get across the Mississippi River, is pretty much wide open country with scrubland, okay, and plains. And so it's hard for us to conceal our land-based systems. So as a result, we had to lean more into the sea and the air because of our terrain, because we have more open prairies and open terrain, especially in the middle and western part of the U.S., okay? Versus Russia. Russia is all land. They only have ocean on one side and on the north is always frozen, so that doesn't even really count, all right? But they're surrounded mostly by land, and they have very dense forest cover, all right? All of Russia is a giant forest. They don't have any prairies. They don't have any plains. Maybe some parts of southern Russia, close to Kazakhstan and close to Mongolia, may have some open terrain and prairies and steppes. Okay, there are some areas in Siberia that have like those steppe environments, but most of Russia is very heavily forested, and because of all that forest cover, they were able to develop a significant portion of their nuclear arsenal as land-based systems because they can conceal their land-based systems inside of those forests, okay? So I'm going to go into more detail of the different nuclear arsenals of the U.S. and Russia because those are the two heavy hitters in the world. We're not going to talk about China or the other countries because they're not a real threat, but we're going to break down the nuclear arsenals of the U.S. and Russia now, and keep in mind the nuclear triad while we're doing this. So, all right, guys, so keeping in mind the nuclear triad, we're going to go over the USA's capabilities and what our nuclear arsenal is composed of. So we have the land, we have the sea, and we have the air. We have a true nuclear triad. So our land-based missiles are mostly located in Minot, North Dakota, in southeastern Wyoming, and around the Great Falls area of Montana. Okay, so these three states here, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana, have all of our land-based nuclear weapons. Okay, and so if you live in any of these states or surrounding areas, these are a major nuclear target in a nuclear war, okay? Because going back to the boxer example, if Russia wants to eliminate our nuclear arsenal, so this way we can't strike back at them, they're going to go after our land-based missiles in North Dakota, in Minot, in Wyoming, in southeastern Wyoming, and in Warren Air Force Base, in Minot Air Force Base, and in Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Those are the three bases, okay? Minot, Warren, and Malmstrom, that's where all of our land-based nuclear weapons are, okay? Those three areas and the surrounding vicinities have all of our silos, and Russia knows where most of them are. So if there was a nuclear war, they would target these areas, okay, to wipe out our ability to strike them. And the missiles that we use, our land-based missiles, are known as the Minuteman ICBMs, and these are the newest weapons that we have. The older ones were the Peacekeeper missiles, and the Peacekeeper missiles were in the 80s. They were phased out in the mid-80s, and they were phased out, and then the Minuteman missiles took over. And again, these missiles can travel 20 times the speed of sound. Okay, they're very, very fast. and they're basically impossible to intercept with an interceptor. Now, moving on from land-based, our sea-based capability, which is very robust. We have Ohio-class subs, which are the largest submarines in the entire U.S. Navy. Okay, the Ohio-class subs have nuclear reactors on board, and they can stay in the ocean for 20 years without any kind of maintenance or any kind of refueling. Okay, they can stay in the ocean for 20 years. Okay, so they have a 20-year service life. And we have about 20 of the Ohio-class subs. Okay, now each of our Ohio-class subs can fire up to 20 Trident missiles. Okay, and the Trident missiles are similar to the Minuteman ICBMs. They're basically the same thing. They have a little bit shorter range, and they can only carry a smaller payload than the Minuteman ICBMs. The Minuteman ICBMs are larger, and they have more fuel, obviously because they're land-based, so they can really make them very massive. But the Trident missiles are still nothing to sneeze at. The Trident missiles can deploy MIRV weapons easily. They can deploy up to 10-15 warheads per missile, and they can fire up to 20 Trident missiles. Okay, they have a bay on the top of the submarine. When the submarine wants to launch the missiles, it comes up from the bottom of the ocean, and it opens up a bay like a door. And out of the door, they have tubes, and the tubes launch the missile up into the air, and then they can hit their target. Okay, they can even launch the missiles from underwater. They don't even have to surface. Okay, so this is a very powerful capability that we have, and we have 20 of these. Okay, and they're constantly circling the ocean. They could be anywhere. They could be in the Arctic Ocean. They could be in the Baltic Sea. They could be in the Mediterranean. They could be in the Black Sea. They could be anywhere. Okay, and that gives us a very powerful ability to counterattack if Russia were to try to take out our land-based systems. We still have all of these subs in the water, and each one of these subs can fire 20 Trident missiles, about 20, and each one of those missiles can have 10 or 15 warheads in each one. So each submarine can launch up to 200 open country, okay, with the exception of the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachians and the East. Most of the United States is open country, so it's easy for our enemies to see where our missiles are located. But Russia, on the other hand, is absolutely massive. If you look at a map of Russia, Russia is a huge country. It's the biggest country in the world. From one side of Russia to the other, you're talking about thousands of miles. You could literally fit 3 of the United States into Russia. So Russia is 3 times the size of the United States. And because the landmass that they have, that's the ocean, and it can go very deep. What's going on? Strike. For that, like I said, strike. Okay, so those are the 2 main types of nuclear and tactical missiles, because those are the easiest to target, because Russia and the U.S. have satellites and recon planes, and we know where a lot of our enemies' silos are located, okay? And so we already know where a lot of Russia's silos are located, and it would be a nuclear weapon. We have the thermal radiation launched out of the Ohio-class subs, okay? They do What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka New York Prepper. In this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about how to survive nuclear war, and this is part of the living room in a residential space, or any kind of missile that's launched from prepare, okay? Bombs, once you get to the surface burst, because the surface burst is going to concentrate, because that's what's the biggest threat, more so than the blast wave and the thermal effects, because the blast wave and the thermal effects are only going to really be a concern if you live close to a nuclear target, 30 meg 50 miles away from the detonation point. Depending on, like I mentioned, you could see even some of the crops may die off, but it's going to take civilian casualties, or if they want to damage a widespread area, okay, because that blast wave is need to worry about that and expand to its maximum size within milliseconds, okay? And within seconds of this, you're going to have your fallout weather, okay, or between 5 to be blown over, because radiation is your fallout, and it's SDZ, MDZ, LDZ, but the blast wave will slow down to the speed of submarine or Chinese submarine. Is the minimum distance you'd have to be to not get any burn at all. All right. What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NY Prepper. In this video, I'm going to block, because you have to know the government says they should not go over that level. What's going on, guys? You're doubling the distance. You can go outside for limited periods of time. This would be 2 inches of steel. This would be 3 inches of steel, 4 inches of steel, 5 inches of steel. Because remember, one halving thickness of steel is 1 inch, okay? So 1 inch of steel, you get 50% reduction for a protection factor of 2. 2 inches of steel is 2 halving thicknesses, 1/4 of the radiation, or protection factor of 4. 3 inches of steel, 3 halving thicknesses, you get 12.5% of the radiation, or 1/8 of the radiation, protection factor of 8, and so on and so forth. Okay, I hope this makes sense. If you guys are still confused, just write me an email, nyprepper85@gmail.com. If there's anything in any of my videos that confuses you, just send me an email, nyprepper85@gmail.com, and I'll try my best to explain it to you. If you have any questions, you can also leave them in the comments, but emails are better because I can very detailed apply everything that we learned so far about distance, time, and shielding and protection factors, and have 5 millisieverts per hour right now inside of that 1-foot concrete building. But after 7 hours, it's going to